I just can't believe it. 100 years of the sinking of the Titanic. It's now April 2012, and it's been 100 years ago when the Titanic sank. The RMS Titanic, as they call it, and I'm just really shocked. I just cannot believe it's been 100 years already. I mean, it's just gone so quick. See, when I was born, it was 81 years ago when the Titanic sank, but now it's April 2012 and it's been 100 years. I just can't believe it. 100 years ago, that's a century. 100 years, 1 century. That's a long time ago. Very long time ago. See, when I was younger, I used to be into the Titanic very much. I used to keep watching the film, and I just went on the computer and learned stuff about it. Actually, I'm going to talk to you about the film in just a moment. Here she is. Here's a picture of the Titanic, and this picture is an actual picture shot of the Titanic. Yeah, there she is. This photo was taken when she was going on her maiden voyage. So when she was about to go to New York. So there's the picture. I'll just get closer for you so you can see it. Here you go, here's the picture. If you want to see this picture on the internet, just go onto Google and type it in, and then just type in Titanic picture, and this is the first image that will come up. Yeah, this is the actual picture of the Titanic, and the picture's it's a very old picture. This is black and white, as you can see. I know a lot about the Titanic when I was younger because I used to watch the film a lot. So many times I've seen the film, but I will be talking to you about the film because some things that you see in the film isn't actually what has actually happened on the true story. So it's what I'm saying is how the ship sank. So I'll talk to you about that soon anyway. When I was younger, I went to the Science Museum in London because they had the Titanic exhibition on there in 2003. So I was 10 years old when that happened. And when I was at the Science Museum in 2003, there was an item that I really liked that they found from the Titanic's shipwrecked from the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and that was the bell that they rang on top of the big deck where they said Iceberg right ahead, and it is actually the real bell. So I'll show you that. Where is it? Here it is. So if I bring it across here for you, that image is actually the picture of the real Titanic bell that was rung to say that there was an iceberg right ahead. So that was saved to that bell. There's also a room that you can go through in the museum where it actually looked like the inside of the ship. So like where people used to go to their rooms, they had like the corridor shape of it. They actually had the proper lighting and all the nice carpets and all the stuff on the walls, and it was all really nice and like nice, beautiful, pretty statues. And this was actually in the Science Museum in London, and they built it to make it look like what it was like actually inside the Titanic. I found it interesting. They found money that people have because there were a lot of multi-millionaires on that ship. I mean, it's a sad story though, but I mean it's very interesting because so many people died that night when the Titanic hit an iceberg and it sank. Because they called it the unsinkable Titanic, but no, it wasn't. It wasn't the unsinkable Titanic. I don't know why they called it that, because it actually sank. So I don't mean to be harsh or anything, but I think the reason why the Titanic sank because the design was terrible. Because the Titanic was made of steel and iron, and I think where the bottom part of the ship, I think that was part of steel as well on the inside, but the outside was made of iron. And also I think the reason why else the ship sank because of the lack of service that the White Star Line team had. That's what they were called. So the crew were called White Star Line. They had the Captain Smith, who also died on the ship. He went down with the ship, and I think it was just all lack of communication really. That's what caused all those people's deaths on that night of 15th of April 1912. Because that night, when they were going full steam ahead, because the top speed of the Titanic is 28 miles per hour, and that is pretty fast, almost 30 miles per hour, but on the waters it is. And on that night, they were warned about icebergs, but they just didn't listen to them. I think it was people that told them back from where the ship was made and where it was set off for its maiden voyage. And I think because they had like telephones in those days where they can connect to each other, and they told them about the icebergs and they were warned about it, but they didn't listen, and they were full steam ahead, top speed, and then what happened? Hit an iceberg, because they were warned about it, but I think they just didn't listen, and then they did it at the last minute. So I know it's a bit harsh what I'm saying, but it's the truth though, isn't it? I mean, it was lack of service. That's why all those people died that night. When I was at the Science Museum, they actually built a big tub, right, and they put a big massive block of ice, and they carved it to make it look like the iceberg that what hit the Titanic. And it was actually in the Science Museum, so it was like in a big tub thingy, like some sort of bath, but really big. And they put a big massive block of ice in, and they carved it down to make it look like an iceberg. And you can actually touch it. It was freezing cold, and how you touched it, it was freezing. You could see it steaming. It was just so cold, like steaming out how cold it was, all the particles. And I touched it, and I can still remember this because of my Asperger's. I've got a good memory. But because when I touched it, it was freezing cold, and they actually put it to the right temperature of how cold it was out there last night. Because mostly all those people that died on there probably when the ship sank, they've all must have frozen to death as well. So some people have drowned, probably some people couldn't swim, and some people were swimming for their lives in that ocean with nowhere else but water, and they all just froze to death. That's how it happened. But when I touched that iceberg that they made in the Science Museum, it was so cold. Imagine if you was on that ship and that happened to you and you went in that water, you'd freeze in minutes. Literally, you'd hyperventilate and then you'd just pass out and then you'd die. And that's what happened to so many people out there. It was just, I just couldn't believe it. It's such a sad story. As of these days now, if there are more icebergs out there, and big ones, because we have bigger ones now that are more stuck together, and if cruise ships are warned about it, they do try and avoid it because we've got special technology where we can detect icebergs. But in those days, since it was 1912 and they didn't have the technology then, that's why it was a bit lack of communication, because they were told about it but they just didn't listen, and they were going too fast. They were thinking, since Titanic's amazing, we'll go full steam ahead. But they shouldn't have that night, because what happened, they probably thought that everything would be fine, but when it didn't. I don't mean to be harsh in any way, but it's the truth. I mean, if they were listening to the people that warned them about the icebergs, they would have been slower, and also they could have turned in a different direction. But to be honest, right, I think the iceberg was not as big as the Titanic. Oh yeah, and this is what I'm going to tell you in the film now. So I'll just tell you about the film quickly. Yeah, so in the film of the Titanic, if you've seen it, because I've seen it millions of times, the iceberg in the film is actually pretty big. But I think that in the real life situation of when the Titanic sank, I think the iceberg was pretty much smaller than what it is in the film. Yeah, but even if the Titanic still hit an iceberg, it's still strong. The iceberg was still strong enough to damage the front part of the ship, and that's what made it sank. Because apparently, the reason why they call it the unsinkable Titanic, because the compartments inside the ship were meant to fill up. If it had a hole or anything and water was coming in, they were all airtight chambers, and if they filled up 2 compartments, the Titanic would still be right. But it opened the front 5 of the compartments of the Titanic, and that's why it started to sink, because it started getting heavier and heavier and then just turning. And also in the film, have you seen the scene where it splits, right? It's like that, isn't it? And it splits, right? I think in the real life Titanic situation, I don't think it actually happened like that, because I've looked on the internet and I've researched. They've said it sank in many different ways, which I believe. I believed it splitted, because when it started to sink, it tilted up and then split. But I don't think it split at that height of a diagonal. I think how can I explain? Well, let me show you an example. So here's the front of the Titanic, right? So, and this bit is where it's going to split, right? So I think that when it started to sink, I think it only went up just about that much and then splitted like that. That's how I think it did, because it wouldn't have done it like that. Because in the film, I know the film of the Titanic is based on the true story, but I mean, the reason why it looks like that in the film, to make it look more realistic, that's all, because it's a film. But I think in the real life situation of when the Titanic actually sank, I think it only split just about when it was about to come up. So when the propellers at the back of the ship were about to come out of the water, I think it splitted there. Because in the film you see it high like that, and I don't think it did do that. I think it must have turned like that, then split like that. I don't think it went like that and splitted. I think it just went like just about here and then splitted. And also, when the scene when it does split and then it starts to pull down, I believe that the ship broke off of the last bit of the back of the Titanic. But then they say, but in the film you see it all the way up, and then it drops down, and then it starts to sink from the bottom bit. But I don't think it actually happened like that. I think it happened like this. So when it sank, it went like this, and then started tilting up, then splits, and then it must have turned that sort of way, split it off from that, then sank more downwards. But it was still there. I wasn't saying it's going to sink quicker. So it must have been like, so it must have gone like that, splitted, pulled that down, and started to make the whole compartment at the back of the Titanic sink, splitted, and then turned a bit, and then waited for a little while, then sink like that. I don't think it sank straight downwards like so. So here's the split bit. So it went like that and then down. I don't think it did that. I think it must have went like that, turned a little bit, and then sank that way. I think that the Titanic split between these two chimneys here. So you had the front two chimneys, and you had these two chimneys. I think that is split just about here. So when all this was under the water, because the iceberg hit there, so it started to feel like the compartments inside the ship here, and it filled up 5 compartments. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it kept going, but it filled up 5, and that's why it started to tilt. And then I think once this bit got too heavy, it splits, and then it crashes back down to the surface of the water. And also, when I was younger, I used to have this little toy boat, and I used to go into my bathroom and fill it up in the bath with water to its highest point, right? And then I tested my little toy boat out. I pushed some water into it so I can start to see it sink. So then once it started to sink, I left it, and then I had some paper and I started writing down how many seconds it took to sink, which way did it start to sink, and like how long would it take to hit the bottom of the bath. And I will work this out, because I think this was to do with my Asperger's, because I've got really good knowledge and experience with the Titanic, because I know a lot about it. I've got good memory of the Titanic, and I know so much about it. And because when I was younger I used to be interested in this a lot. That's why I went to the Science Museum in London when the Titanic exhibition was on in 2003. So what I did, so I put it in, and then it started to sink, and it sank. It went up, but then it like sort of dropped. So, but the toy boat I had, it wasn't made to split. The reason why that split, because the Titanic was so long, really long, and this bit just got too heavy and it just split. That's how it did it. The Titanic's weight was 46,328 tons. Now that is actually quite heavy for a ship, because the ship was, the reason why it was more heavier because of the structure of it, of all the stuff they put on it, and that's what made it more heavy. So the reason why it weighed so much tons is because when it started to sink, that bit just couldn't handle it, and that's why it splitted. So it splits, and that bit so when it was up in the air, it splits. And the reason why is because probably that half bit, so it's 46,000 tons, probably that half of it was about, that's 46,000 tons, probably that bit was about 10,000 tons, or even more than that, because it had the propellers at the back, and it was that, I think the back was so heavy because that's mostly where the engine is, and I think probably that's why it split, because that just made me thought actually, because the engine's at the back, and also because since the ship was going upwards, this bit couldn't handle the back of the decks of the ship's weight, and it just suddenly split and then snapped it off. But it wasn't too high. I bet even if this was like that, it would have split by then. Probably when it was about there, it just splits. So I think that's what I believe, but we'll never know, because it's quite a bit of a mystery, really. I'll tell you, there weren't much lifeboats on board, because on the ship they had 20 lifeboats to carry the maximum. So there was 20 lifeboats on board, some at the front and some at the back, and also on the other side. So there's 20 of them, and all those boats all together could carry 1,178 people. So that's quite a lot of people in just one boat. So, well, they had 20 of them, which was good, but it wasn't enough though, because a lot of people died on that night, including some of the passengers and the crew who helped the White Star Line company to run the Titanic. I just thought of this though, if only 706 people survived that night and who lived to tell the tale about the Titanic, only 706, but I just said that 20 lifeboats could carry the maximum of 1,178 people, but how come only 706 survived? How come there wasn't, let me work it out, 700, 800, 9, 3, so 300 or 400 have died. I mean, another 400 people could have survived. And I think the reason why that is because I think people panicked. Yeah, I just think people panicked on that day because so many people on that ship, they didn't have enough lifeboats, but they should have though. But since that disaster happened, now these days we've got boats what are big now, can carry a lot more people, just a lot more people. So basically we've got lifeboats in big cruise ships now what can carry every single person on board. But in those days they didn't have, apparently they had some laws apparently saying that they only had to put a certain amount of lifeboats on there. But then they changed the law because of what the disaster happened with the Titanic, because there wasn't enough lifeboats. If there was about 100 or 120 lifeboats on board, I think everyone could have lived. And also, right, let me show you this. Where is it? If they had lifeboats outside on the deck, why couldn't they have some inside? I just thought of that way. So if they didn't have any of these lifeboats, why couldn't they have had any inside? Do you know what I mean? It doesn't matter if there's like space about, because where the corridors are, they could have had some like going down there, like, and just tilt the side of the wall. So where like they had the corridors where you can go outside of the ship, why couldn't they have these big lifeboats just on the side of the wall? So and they'll be able to have more lifeboats. But all they had were the 20 lifeboats on deck. I don't know. I really don't know. There are a lot of mysteries with this ship. I mean, I know it a lot, and I've got a lot of knowledge about it, and I know things about it, and I've got a good memory, like watching the film and knowing things about it, and also remembering about the exhibition. But there's still a lot of mysteries that we need to solve about the Titanic. And I think now the ship is disintegrating now, because since it was 100 years it sank, it's been under the Atlantic Ocean for 100 years now, and I think it's still there, but it won't last for long. I think it's starting to like disintegrate because there's a lot of like living things living on it, and it starts eating away the metal, and it gets all rusty, and it will start to fall apart basically. So yeah, so I think it'll be down there, but it will just all fall to bits, I think, very soon. But the good thing is that we have got some parts from the Titanic that we've saved, like the bell. Like when I went to the Science Museum, we saw the bell. Actually, they dangled it on the on a like a little thin piece of wire, and it was just really good to see it. But they didn't have just the bell; they had plates, and as I said, they had money as well. Like they found on the ship, they found chairs and beds and all sorts of old pieces of wood and some other bits of the crew that used to, like, you know, where like in the room where they had the steering wheel of the ship, they had some bits in there that they found from the Titanic. Yeah, so I'll tell you, there were a lot of multi-millionaires on that ship that lost their lives. Yeah, quite most of the people on the Titanic were multi-millionaires. Yeah. On the 10th of April 1912, the RMS Titanic was ready to set her maiden voyage from Southampton, which is in England, to go to France to go and pick some passengers up from there, and then went to Ireland to go pick some more passengers up, and then she went to set a big maiden voyage to go through the Atlantic Ocean to get to New York. When the Titanic was being built in 1911 in Belfast in Northern Ireland, 2 people did die from when the Titanic was being built, and I think one person fell off, and I think one person got crushed by some heavy steel. I think so, but I'm not really particularly sure. But anyway, but 2 people did die when building the Titanic, and it's just been such a great loss because there was 3,000 people, 3,000 men building the Titanic, including women who did all of the furnitures and stuff to make it look nice. They all did that, and 2 men lost their lives for building that lovely ship, and then it sank. Do you know what I mean? It's just a terrible thing. It's like you put something really good effort into, and then it ends up disappearing the next. But I mean, these things happen in life. It's all part of learning how we build things and all that. So if you look here, this is the National Geographic website, and this is the picture of the front of the Titanic that's underwater, and you can see all the bits that are on it that this has been underwater for 100 years now and it's still there, but all of this is gonna eventually fall apart and just rot and just break off. Basically, the pole bits, the barrier bits, are gonna get thinner and thinner. It's just gonna snap off, and then the whole lot is just gonna disappear very soon. It's all just gonna disintegrate. But this picture was taken in 2004, I think. I think it was. Look at this one. Look. I think this is a room, and these two here these are windows, and I bet this was a room. But look, it's all collapsed. But this, I bet, used to be up straight, and it used to be a corridor room that people walked down to get to their bedrooms and stuff. Gosh, it's just fascinating to look at. See, look at all the damage that's on it and interesting things. I've seen this before. This is one of my favourite pictures. This is. I've seen this before, and this here is the propeller of the Titanic, and I tell you, this is pretty big. This thing. It looks small, but if I was standing there, probably about that big. I'm not sure. Probably smaller than that. But these propellers were massive, really big. Yeah, I think that's one of the small propellers. But it's really good that we've actually got a picture of that, because it's really fascinating to look at. I think, right, they should actually just dig it out and actually take it up to the surface and put that in a museum, because that would be really good. Because that is really interesting, because the propellers are the most important things on the ship for the Titanic, because that's what they used to get to that they tried to get to America for, and that's the big propellers they do. The propellers we have these days on ships, they're more smaller, but these ones were really big, bigger than a person. But the propellers we have now these days are quite big, but they're really smaller, and yeah, they're very small, and they spin much faster. Because the cruise ships we have, some cruise ships have them like actually inside a tube, but the design on the Titanic was much different with the propellers. They had it on the outside, but the cruise ships we have these days, they usually have the propellers in like a big pole, but this one was just on the outside itself. Oh wow, look at this image. Look, I guess I was wrong. So I think this is an actual picture of the back of propellers of the Titanic. So if you look at the propeller, look how big it is compared to the people that are standing at the bottom. So basically, I got it wrong then. So I wouldn't be that big. I'll be probably that big. So if you look at the propeller, right, if that's the propeller to this image, wrong one. There we go. Look. If you look, so if I put my hand against there, that's how big it is compared to these propellers. So if I put it back to the thing, I'll be probably, let's work it out. I mean, these propellers are just so big. I can't tell. So if I'm like that, okay, so if I was that small, I'd probably be about that small compared to the propeller. So that actually is pretty big, because I think that's an actual picture of it. But look, so what I was on about, the design is different compared to the cruise ships we have these days. Is that, look at the curve, that's the bit what supports the propeller, and then you have the big rudder thing, but now we have it different. Usually we have the propellers that change in different ways of different direction, but here you have the big massive rudder and the big propeller in the middle, and these two ones here. So here's the image that I accidentally clicked on. This one is the cruise ships we have these days. Right, so the propellers are much more small, and I think they also so it can be more stronger and also to go more faster. And this cruise ship doesn't have no rudders. Yeah, so these ones do have some sort of rudder. It's at the top here. This bit is the big motor that powers the propellers, and I think they're small because, yeah, to get more speed and also to keep its strength. And this here is the rudder. This is the flat part what actually helps it, but also these two big motors, they turn the propeller to turn different directions. So it's very different compared to the picture of this one, because all this had was just a big rudder. These just stayed where they are. These didn't move at all, as I said, because these two bits are the supporters of the two small propellers at the side, and then you have the big massive one in the middle, and then you just had the rudder. So that's how they used it to turn the ship around. But as of our time, with our technology is more advanced now, we've got these propellers that can turn the whole motor around, because up here is the rudder bit, two of them, and then the whole of these machines can just turn and turn the propellers in different ways. So basically, the propellers are acting like rudders as well. God, this is fascinating. I mean, look at that. Just incredible. I think that's a submarine. I think probably James Cameron's in there discovering it, because James Cameron did go down there and discovered the Titanic. What was the image I was on? Yeah, this one. Look, I think that's one of the submarine's machines with camera and all all the machine parts on it to get all the items off the Titanic. That's still in place and not damaged, and being taken up to the surface, being taken to museums and get discovered. Yeah, so that's about it really. I've said quite a bit about the Titanic. I know a lot about it, and the film is basically, yeah, it's based on the true story, but in the film, when you see the Titanic starting to sink, I think that bit was real, but when it comes to the scene of when it splits, I think it must have done it in such a different way. But I did believe the ship did split in half, because of the way that the iceberg hit the water. Hit the ship and filled up the 5 compartments. Because if it filled up just 2 compartments, which is at the front, it would have stayed unsinkable. But since the iceberg went shredded through the whole of here, it opened all the front 5 compartments, and it just got too heavy, and then it just filled up, and that's how it sank really. So even if they call it the unsinkable Titanic, but that's only for like 2 compartments, but it opened the front 5, so that's how it happened. Aha! Look what I've just found on here, right? I've just found a fact about the Titanic when it hit the iceberg. It says here, there were 6 ice warnings received by the Titanic on the day of the collision. They were all ignored by the wireless operator, who was preoccupied with transmitting passenger messages. See, he did send 6 iceberg warnings and they were all ignored. Can you believe that? That's why it's saying, because of lack of communication, what happened on that ship that night. Do you know what I mean? Aha! Here's another fact I just said, and I knew this, right? In the film of the Titanic, right, you know the iceberg's really big and it goes over the ship. Well, at the real collision of the Titanic, right, it says here, the iceberg of the Titanic that struck the Titanic was not a very big one. It did not even come up as high as the bridge of the ship. Can you believe that? So the bridge of the ship is on top of it, and the iceberg wasn't even high as that. I think it was only as high as so let me work it out. So here's the Titanic. So I think the iceberg was about to there. So here's the whole ship with the chimneys. I think the iceberg was probably that big. So it wasn't even bigger than the Titanic. I knew it. I knew it. It's all on here. It's a fact though, yeah. But I think it wasn't big, because if it was big, I think they would have seen it much easier. But on that night, it says here that since the full moon wasn't out, the ocean was calm and it was all still water. That's why apparently it said it's very difficult to see the iceberg. But since if it was big, they would have been able to see it by now. But since it was a small one, they've only just realised it. I don't think it's not like small, just like as I just said. Here's the ship, so it's probably as big as my finger here. So, but even if they were warned about it, they should have listened. That's why so many people died that night, because lack of communication. It's true though. I know it's a bit harsh what I'm saying, but it's the truth. Unfortunately, if none of that stuff never happened, if they listened to them and they were slower, I think the Titanic would still be here today. Do you know what I think they should have done? I think they shouldn't have turned and then were thinking that they were going to avoid the iceberg, but when they didn't, because the Titanic was coming towards the iceberg and they turned a bit too late, and it collided at the bottom right side of the ship. And I think that since it was a small iceberg, I think they should have just gone directly right through it, because if they did that, it would have broken the iceberg in half, so they can just go right through it, and I don't think no damage would have happened. Because at the front of the Titanic, it's really like a sharp point, and if the iceberg was like here, or whatever, and then it just, like, they go forward with it, it would break it in half, and then they would just carry on. Because since that bit's like a point, basically it's like a shred. It's like if it hits something, it's gonna break it. And I think they should have done that, because since they turned at the last minute and it was too late, they hit the bottom. That's the bottom right hand side of the ship, and then that's how the water got in and filled up the first 5 compartments. Because when it hit it didn't hit it just once. It was still damaging the rest of it while it was still going on. So probably it was, I'd say about 10 or 20 seconds it was still hitting the iceberg from the side, and it ripped open the big holes to fill up the 5 compartments. I'll tell you, if that stuff didn't happen, the Titanic would still be here today. Because I was just thinking, like, if none of that stuff never happened, and they turned or turned in a different direction, and they saw a big iceberg coming, or a small one or whatever, and they missed it, that would have been a good thing then, because the ship would have gotten to New York by now and then all the way back. But they were warned about it, and if that stuff never happened, I think the ship would be here today. But since now we understand that we have to be so careful out there, because we've got icebergs these days now what are bigger because of like global warming and stuff, and like a lot of ice is breaking from the Atlantic Ocean and from up north where Greenland is, and also at the bottom of the earth as well. It's all the ice is breaking, it's just floating in the water, and it's massive big chunks of ice. It's not just small ice, big icebergs. But hopefully the cruise ships we have these days, we have some special technology where we can actually detect icebergs. But in those days they didn't have the technology, but these days now we do have the technology. But as I said, they were warned about it and they just ignored it. But since the Titanic is such a famous ship, when the disaster happened, it shocked the world. And since we've learned from it, now we've made cruise ships these days much more safer, so they don't collide with icebergs. And mostly we've got the most advanced technology, and we've got the most powerful pieces of metal that we put to ships, so if it hits an iceberg it won't break. I think the reason why that is because as I said, the Titanic was made of steel and iron, and it was really weak. I think it was a really poor design for it. I think they should have used something stronger. I think probably only had 1 sheet of steel, but they should have combined 2 or 3 together. And then if they hit an iceberg, it wouldn't have broken. But it did, because the iceberg bent the metal steel underneath the ship, and that was probably the weak spot. That's why it hit the side. But if it hit forward, as I said, it would have snapped the iceberg in half. But since it hit there, it broke the metal steel, and then that's how the water got through. It made like really sharp holes. I'll tell you something, the Titanic's true events just shocks the whole world. It's one of the world's most famous ships of all time, and it always will be, and it will never be forgotten. So there you have it. I've explained all of I've just explained to you my knowledge and my thinking and my understanding of the Titanic and what I know about it. And that's what I can say really. But if you want to know more about it, just go on the internet, go on Google and find some information about it. Trust me, there is loads of information on the internet. Yeah, so as I just said, go on Google and find some information, type in Titanic and it'll come up with Wikipedia, and it'll tell you everything, how much it weighed and all that stuff. And it's just a really famous ship, and it always will be, even if it's a ship that sank. But it'll be a famous ship because it was a really big ship, and it was a famous ship that sank as well. And it is a sad event as well. Yeah, but anyway, if you want to find some information about it, just go on the internet, just go onto Google and type in the Titanic and what you want to find out about it. Tell you, what we know about the Titanic is a great investigation about it, but it is also a sad time, and it will be sad for a while because it's been 100 years, and it's really sad because so many people died that night, just loads of people. Most of them probably drowned, and some of them must have frozen to death. It was so cold that night, so near the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah, it's just so sad. The Titanic's memory will always live on, forever. We'll never forget that ship. So there we have it, people. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment below telling me what you think about 100 Years of the Titanic. And to all of the people that are watching this, please give many respects to all the people that died. Because 1,517 people lost their lives that night. And only 706 survived that night. Take care, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye bye.